The week I received the university's Research Excellence Award, I sat in a conference room on the fourth floor and let people shake my hand. My department head gave a small speech. There was a cake, store-bought, white frosting, my name spelled right. People said things like well-deserved and long overdue, and I smiled and held my paper plate and thought, my father has never been in a room where someone said my name like that. Not because he couldn't have been, because he never came. I want to be clear about something before we go any further. I'm not going to tell you my father was a monster. He wasn't. He was a man who coached youth soccer for 22 years and genuinely believed that showing up for a match, a training session, or a regional qualifier was the highest form of love he knew. He showed up for those. Every single one. I know because I watched him do it. He just didn't show up for mine. My graduation. The one I'd worked toward for 4 years. The one where I walked across a stage in a navy gown and shook a dean's hand and heard my name read to 800 people. It fell on the same afternoon as my brother Fletcher's regional qualifier. Fletcher was 17. It was, by all accounts, an important game. My father went to the game. I still have the program from that ceremony. The cover has gone slightly soft at the edges, bowed inward from years in the bottom of a drawer I rarely open. My name is on page 14. I have never actually read that page. I don't know why I kept it. 10 years later, my father called me. And here is the thing I never say out loud. It isn't the phone call that stays with me. It isn't even what he said. It's what I realized in the 40 seconds before I picked up. 40 seconds, standing in my kitchen, watching his name on the screen. What I realized about who I had become in all the years he hadn't been watching. If you've ever stood in a room full of people applauding you and still felt the particular quiet of the one seat that was always empty, stay with me. I want to tell you what I decided. There is a memory I keep coming back to, not because it was the worst one, because it was the first one I understood. I was 9 years old. A Sunday afternoon in late September, the kind where the light goes golden and the air smells like cut grass and someone's dinner. My father was in the backyard with Fletcher, running drills. Left foot kicks. Over and over, patient and focused, his whole body turned toward my brother like a compass finding north. I had just finished my book report. 12 pages. Handwritten because I thought handwriting looked more serious. Color-coded sections, blue for summary, green for analysis, and red for what I thought the author was really trying to say. I was 9. I didn't fully know what analysis meant. I did it anyway because I wanted it to be the kind of thing that made someone stop and look. I took it outside. My father glanced up from the drill, smiled, a real smile, not a dismissive one, and said, "Show me later, Tate." Then he turned back to Fletcher. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, opened the report to page 1, read the whole thing myself, out loud, in a quiet voice, the way I imagined a teacher might. When I finished, I put it on the stack of papers by the toaster. My mother found it 2 days later and said it was wonderful. I said thank you. I didn't tell her I'd been waiting for someone else to say it first. That was the first time I became my own audience. I told myself it was fine. I was 9. I believed it. Here is what you need to understand about the girl I was growing up with. I was never the kind of child who demanded things. I didn't stamp my feet. I didn't sulk at the dinner table and didn't corner my parents and ask why Fletcher got more. I was, and I say this without pride because it cost me considerably, easy. I absorbed things quietly and kept moving. What I did instead of asking was achieve it. At 13, I started entering essay competitions. At 16, I won a regional writing award, a certificate in a frame, my name printed in a font that looked important. I left it on the kitchen counter for a week. My father said, "Good for you, Tate," and moved it to make room for the mail. I told myself that was the same as being proud of me. Same year, Fletcher got a C on his history exam. Our father took him out for burgers that evening to shake it off. I heard them laughing when they came in through the door at 9 o'clock, my father's hand on Fletcher's shoulder, Fletcher still in his jacket. I had gotten a 97 on the same exam. My paper was in the fridge. It stayed there for 3 weeks until I took it down myself and put it in the recycling without looking at it. I know how that sounds. I want to be careful not to make it sound worse than it was. My father wasn't cruel. He wasn't calculating. He simply had a language of love that was entirely physical. Presence, proximity, the specific gravity of a man watching his son run. And that language did not have a translation for what I was doing. Fletcher turned 14. My father gave a toast at his birthday dinner. 4 minutes, no notes. The names of coaches who believed in him, and a story about the time Fletcher fell asleep on the way home from a tournament and snored so loudly the windows fogged. People laughed. My father's face was open in a way I didn't often see. When I turned 14, he gave me a card. Happy birthday, love, Dad. I read it 3 times, slowly, to make sure I hadn't missed anything written small. I hadn't. The scholarship was the one I was most sure about. Surely this, a full academic scholarship, the first in the family, my name in a letter from a university. Surely this was the thing that was finally large enough, finally undeniable enough, inconvenient enough to ignore. I called home from the payphone in my school hallway. My mother answered. She cried, which I will always love her for. My father got on the line. That's great, Tate. Really great. Then he handed the phone back. That evening I could hear him on his mobile in the next room, telling someone, a friend, another coach I never knew, who, about Fletcher's new cleats. A brand he'd been waiting to afford. The right fit for his left foot. I timed it. 11 minutes. I set the phone down carefully on the nightstand. I didn't slam it. I just set it down very deliberately, the way you set down something you finally decided to stop carrying. Except I didn't stop carrying it. That is the part one have to be honest about. I kept trying. I kept making things worth seeing. I graduated top of my class, wrote a personal statement that my English teacher said she was going to keep a copy of, and walked out of school on the last day with more certificates than I could hold. I put them all in a drawer, not in anger, in habit, because somewhere along the way, storing my own proof had become second nature. I had built an entire archive of myself that no one had ever asked to see. And the graduation program, when it came, for years later, would simply be the final document in a collection that began with a color-coded book report on a Sunday afternoon in September. I want to tell you I saw it coming, that I was smart enough, even at 16, to understand what was happening and decide it didn't matter. But that would be a lie. The truth is, I kept trying. I kept making things worth seeing. I just got very, very good at not letting anyone know I was waiting to be seen. There was just one moment, one specific moment, I hadn't prepared for. The one where I finally stopped waiting. And the way that happened was nothing like I would have chosen. The graduation was 3 weeks away when I mentioned it the first time. I mentioned it deliberately. I didn't ask. I don't think I was capable of asking for something like that. Not directly, not in a way that acknowledged I needed it. Instead, I brought it up the way you bring up the weather. Casually. Like it was information he might find useful rather than a thing I was quietly desperate for. He nodded, said he wouldn't miss it. I mentioned it again a week later. Same response. Of course, Tate. His voice is warm, easy, and already moving on to something else. The third time was from my student apartment. It was raining, the persistent, windless kind that makes a room feel smaller than it is. I was sitting at my desk looking at the ceremony invitation I'd pinned above my monitor, the one with the university crest, and my name typed in a font that made it look permanent. Official. Real. I called him. Of course I'll be there, he said. I said I would. There was something underneath that. Not irritation, exactly. More like the mild impatience of a man being asked to confirm something he considers settled. Like I was being, and I hated myself for even thinking the word needy. I told myself I was overreacting. I had always had that tendency. I put the invitation in my bag to give him in person, and I decided to stop counting the times I'd asked because counting had started to feel like building a case, and I didn't want to build a case. I wanted to believe him. I was good at believing things I needed to believe. 2 days before the ceremony, I went to the university bookshop and bought 2 copies of the graduation program. One for me, one for him. I still have both of them. Graduation morning, I got dressed alone. Navy gown over a cream dress. Hair pinned back with the pins I'd bought specially, and then nearly lost in the bathroom sink. A pair of small pearl earrings my mother had sent in the post with a card that said, "I wish I could be there in person." She couldn't afford the train fare, so she'd sent the earrings instead, and I had understood this completely and loved her for it without complication. Before I left, I took a photograph of myself in the bathroom mirror. Not for anyone. Not to send. Just to have it. Evidence, I suppose, of the version of myself that existed before I walked into that auditorium and found out what I already knew. The family seating was in the center section, rows C through F. I found my mother in row D during the processional. She was sitting very straight, handbag on her lap, her good coat on. She looked the way she always looked at things that mattered to her, braced and present, and trying not to show how much. The seat beside her was empty. I found it immediately. The way you find a gap in a sentence where a word should be, not by looking for it, but because the eye goes there on its own. Row D, third seat in. My mother's handbag on one side, and an elderly man in a gray suit on the other. I crossed the stage, shook the dean's hand, heard my name. The seat did not move. In the reception hall afterward, I called my father's mobile. He answered on the second ring. How did it go? Past tense. Already over. Already filed. I was standing in the middle of that hall with my diploma in one hand and my phone in the other, and I could hear music somewhere and people laughing and the particular clink of glasses that means celebration. And I said, "Good." It was good. Fletcher's team made it through, by the way. 3-2. Came back from a goal down in the second half. I looked at my diploma. My name is on it in the same font as the invitation. Official. Permanent. That's great, Dad. Really great. I hung up, put the phone in my pocket, went to find my mother. I did not cry. I was 22 years old, and I had already learned that there is a kind of grief that doesn't come with tears. It comes instead with a very clean, very quiet understanding. The way a door doesn't slam, but simply closes, the latch catching without drama. Something was not coming. It had never been coming. And I had run out of ways to keep pretending otherwise. What I lost that afternoon was not my father. I had been losing him in increments for years. In book reports left on kitchen tables, in exam scores that stayed on the fridge until I took them down myself, and in 11-minute phone calls about a pair of cleats. The losing had been going on for so long, it had become a kind of background noise I'd stopped noticing. What I lost that afternoon was the last version of myself, who was still trying. The girl who bought 2 copies of the program. The girl who timed phone calls. The girl who read her own work aloud at a kitchen table because she showed me later had turned into a decade of waiting, and she had kept waiting anyway because she was very good at it, and because she had confused patience with hope. That evening I went home and put the spare graduation program in the drawer beside my bed. Face down. The way you put away a photograph of someone you're not ready to stop loving but can't keep looking at. I didn't throw it away. I don't know why. My mother called the next morning. We talked for 40 minutes. At some point she said, "He's proud of you, Tate. He just doesn't always know how to show it." I said, "I know." And I let that be enough. I let it be enough for a very long time. There was one thing I didn't know until much later. About that day. About the specific choice my father made in the car park of a soccer ground 40 minutes away, the moment he made it and what he said and who heard him say it. Fletcher told me. 10 years after the fact, over coffee, he was not quite able to look at me while he did. And when I heard it, I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I felt something worse. The 3 years after graduation unraveled the way these things do, not in a single moment, but in a series of small, unremarkable surrenders. I got a junior position at a research foundation 6 weeks after finishing my degree. I worked hard. I was promoted once at the 14-month mark by a manager who noticed things. Then she left and her replacement didn't, and I was passed over for the next promotion by a colleague who spoke loudly in meetings and cited other people's work as his own and had, as far as I could tell, never once doubted whether he deserved to be in a room. I said nothing. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it's accurate, and because I think it's important to be accurate about the ways we participate in our own erasure. I had spent a lifetime learning to absorb quietly and keep moving. That habit does not confine itself to one relationship. I moved to a smaller city for a job that didn't feel worth the move. The flat was fine. The work was fine. I called home less. My father did not call at all. That was when I began to understand something I should have named years earlier, that every conversation we'd ever had been initiated by me. Every visit is arranged by me. Every thread of connection is maintained exclusively by me. I had been the infrastructure of our relationship, and I had never once questioned whether that was normal because I had never known it to be any other way. I didn't stop calling immediately. I reduced. I observed. And I was correct. One Wednesday morning, I was 30 years old. I sat down on the floor of my flat and didn't get back up. Not dramatically. There was nothing dramatic about it. I was on my way to the kitchen, and I sat down in the hallway, back against the wall, and simply didn't continue. My filthy was in my hand. I set it on the floor beside me. I looked at the patch of wall across from me, a scuff mark I'd been meaning to paint over since I moved in, a small dark smear at knee height, and I sat with it. I wasn't crying. I had finished crying some months before. What replaced it was something I found harder to manage than grief, because grief at least has a shape. It has edges. You can feel where it starts and stops. What I had instead was a flatness, a low, even absence of much. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner for one person. I watched things on my laptop I couldn't have told you about the next morning. I sat on that floor for a long time. Somewhere above me, a child was practicing the recorder. Badly. The same 4 notes, repeated wrong, then slightly less wrong, then almost right, then wrong again from the beginning. It was not beautiful. It was not even close to beautiful. It was just the sound of someone doing a thing over and over because they had decided to, because no one had asked them to, and no one was waiting for them to get it right, because the doing of it was apparently sufficient reason to keep doing it. I drank my cold coffee. I thought about that for a while. 30 years. That was how long I had been trying to earn a witness. Someone to sit in a row, any auditorium, any conference room on any 4th floor, and simply watch. Watch and confirm that the thing I was doing was real, was worth something, and was seen. And what I understood, sitting on that floor at 30 with a cold mug and a scuff mark on the wall, was that I had been practicing the wrong thing entirely. I had been practicing excellence. I should have been practicing indifference to the empty seat. Not because the seat didn't matter. It did. It still does. I am not going to tell you it doesn't, because that would be the kind of clean resolution that makes for a tidy story and a dishonest one. The seat mattered. The seat will probably always matter a little. But I was the one on the stage. And the stage was mine whether he came or not. I didn't need him to see me graduate. I needed to stop needing him to. Those are not the same thing. And only one of them was ever in my control. Later that day, I opened the drawer beside my bed, looking for a phone charger. The graduation program was there. Face down, exactly where I'd left it 8 years before. I picked it up. I turned it over. I looked at the cover, the university crest, slightly faded now, the title of the ceremony, and the year. I put it on the windowsill, not framed, not displayed, not a statement of anything, just no longer face down. I didn't make a plan. I want to be clear about that because I think there's a version of this story where the woman on the floor stands up and decides to win something, and that is not what happened. What happened was quieter and, I think, more permanent. I decided to stop performing for an audience that had already left the building. I would do my work. I would build something. And if it became something worth witnessing, that would be for me to witness first. That was enough. For the first time in 30 years, that was genuinely enough. 2 years passed. Then 2 more. Then the university position, the department that used her actual mind, the commendation, the cake with her name spelled right. I don't want to make the rebuilding sound simple because it wasn't. But I also don't want to linger on it the way people linger on suffering, as though the hard part is the only part worth describing. What I will say is this. By the time I was 34, I had a flat with a bay window and good morning light. I had a kitchen I'd learned to cook in, actually cook, not just feed myself. I had a job where people sent me problems that required careful thought and waited for my careful answers, and found that they were useful. And I had Romalie. Romalie Oakes was a colleague, technically. In practice, she was the first person in my adult life who simply assumed I was interesting and then proceeded accordingly, without requiring me to prove it, without making a ceremony of noticing it. She asked questions like, she expected the answers to be worth hearing. For a long time, I didn't quite know what to do with that. I kept waiting for the asterisk. There wasn't one. I was not healed, exactly. I want to be precise about that. Healed implies a return to some prior undamaged state, and I'm not sure that state ever existed, and I'm not sure returning to it was ever the point. What I was recalibrated, leveled. I had stopped performing for the empty seat and started, slowly, imperfectly, with significant backsliding, doing things because they were worth doing. There is a difference. It took me a long time to feel it. I did not speak to my father. Not out of strategy. I want to be clear about that too, because I think it would be more satisfying, tidier, if I could tell you I went silent deliberately as a move. I didn't. I went silent because we had run out of things to talk about that weren't the thing, and neither of us had been willing to say the thing, and so eventually there was nothing left. A relationship cannot survive indefinitely on the avoidance of its central fact. What I didn't anticipate was what the silence would do. My mother mentioned it carefully the way she mentioned difficult things, over the phone in the middle of another conversation, as though it were incidental. That your father had been asking after me. That he seemed to be sitting with something, that he wasn't sleeping well. I listened. I did not feel what the 22-year-old version of me would have felt. No surge, no softening, no reaching for the phone. What I felt was something more level than that, more composed. Something that might have been called vindication, if I'd been willing to name it out loud. I wasn't, but it was there. Romalie knew the outline of the story. Not every detail, but enough. One afternoon over lunch, she looked at me without preamble and said, "If he asked to see you, would you go?" I was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," I said. And I meant it completely. There was a version of me, 9 years old at a kitchen table, 22 years old scanning row D from a stage, who would have driven through the night without stopping. There was also the version sitting here in a restaurant with a life that worked. With a bay window and a colleague who asked questions worth answering and a kitchen that smelled like something she'd made herself. I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what happened if I disturbed it. I didn't say any of that to Romalie. What I said was, I suppose it depends on what he wants to say. It was the most honest thing I'd said about my father in 10 years. The call came on a Monday evening in late October. I was in my kitchen. The radio was on, something low, something I wasn't really listening to. I was making dinner, the kind that takes long enough to be satisfying, and the flat smelled like garlic and something warm, and it was the sort of evening that had, over the past 4 years, become simply my life rather than a consolation prize for a different one. My phone lit up on the counter. I saw his name. I stood very still. Later I would count it 40 seconds. I know because I watched the screen and his name stayed lit, and I counted without meaning to, the way you count things when your mind needs something to do while the rest of you decide. Then I picked it up. 6 weeks after the call, I met Fletcher for coffee. We hadn't seen each other in 3 years, not because of anything that had happened between us, just the slow drift of separate lives, the way distance became a habit without anyone deciding it. He looked thinner than I remembered. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with his hands around a cup. He wasn't drinking, staring at the table the way people stare at things when they're rehearsing something. We talked about nothing for 20 minutes. His job. My flat. A film one of us had seen. The ordinary scaffolding people erect when when they're working up to something. Then he set his spoon down and said, "I need to tell you something about graduation, about what actually happened." He'd been in the car park that morning, waiting by the car while my father finished a conversation with another coach. He wasn't trying to overhear. He just did. What my father said was this: "She doesn't need me there. She's got it. She's always had it." He said it the way you say something you believe is a compliment, warmly, with a kind of pride that had nowhere to go, pride that had, apparently, been sitting in a car park 40 minutes away while I crossed a stage alone and called him afterward to hear about a football score. He wasn't there because he didn't care. He was there because he did, and he didn't know how to be in a room where that caring would be visible and witnessed and real, where he would have to sit in row D and watch his daughter become something that exceeded the frame he had built for understanding her. She's got it. As though capability were a reason to stay away rather than the most important reason to show up. Fletcher was crying slightly into his coffee cup, trying not to show it. I sat with what he'd told me for a long time. He was proud of me, I said finally. He just didn't know what to do with that. "Yes," said Fletcher. "That's almost worse," I said. "I know," he said. I drove home and sat in my car outside my building for a while. Not the dramatic kind of sitting. Just the kind where you need the particular stillness of a parked engine before you go inside and become a person again. Cruelty, I could have held on to it. Cruelty has clean edges. You can build a wall against cruelty and stand behind it and feel entirely justified. What Fletcher had given me instead was this. My father had been afraid of me, afraid of my competence, my self-sufficiency, and the way I had learned, partly because he'd made it necessary to need nothing visibly. He had looked at his daughter and seen someone who didn't require him, and instead of understanding that he had taught me that, he had simply believed it. Cowardice dressed up as confidence in me. That was harder. That was considerably harder. He came on a Saturday 6 days later, drove 2 hours, knocked instead of ringing the bell, which I noticed. My kitchen is narrow. There is a table that fits 2 people if they don't mind being close, a window that looks onto the building opposite, and a pot of tea I made that neither of us touched. Desmond sat down in his coat. He hadn't taken it off, which told me something about how long he expected to be allowed to stay. I stood at the counter. That was deliberate. "I should have been there," he said. "I know that. I've known about it a long time." "What stopped you calling sooner?" A pause. The kind that has weight in it. I didn't know what to say. "You could have said what you just said," I told him. It took 11 seconds. He looked down. Then, "You never seemed like you needed." I know. I kept my voice even. That's the thing about people who've learned to need nothing. They get very good at it. And you never have to feel what you chose. He was quiet. "I wasn't asking you to fix me, Dad. I was asking you to show up. Those are not the same thing. And only one of them was ever in your control." He didn't cry. What he did was look at his hands. Both of them, flat on the table. The way a man looks at something he thought he knew and has suddenly found to be strange to him. Not performing remorse. Not reaching for an excuse. Just looking. At his hands. At what they had and hadn't done. I have thought about that moment many times since. The specific quality of it. Because it wasn't humiliation, I didn't want that, and it wouldn't have felt like justice if it had been. What it was something quieter and more permanent. It was the moment my father saw what he had done. Not as an accident. Not as a misunderstanding. As a choice, one he had made so many times, so automatically, that it had become invisible to him. The visibility was the consequence. It was worse than anything I could have said in anger. And I had not planned it. I had simply told the truth, and the truth had done it. 10 years were in that kitchen. Not as a number. As a weight. In every silence between us, in the coat he hadn't taken off, in the tea going cold between 2 people who had a decade of practice at not saying the thing. He had called me 10 years later, and I had spent 6 weeks deciding whether to let him in, And now here we were in my narrow kitchen with the window that looked onto nothing in particular, and the 10 years were simply present, sitting at the table with us, taking up the space that an apology cannot fill, but has to try. I made the tea, put a mug in front of him, sat down across the table. "I'm not asking you to undo it," I said. "I don't think that's possible. I'm deciding what I want the next 10 years to look like. And I haven't decided yet whether there's room in that for this conversation to mean something. But I wanted to have it." He wrapped both hands around the mug. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. That felt, for the first time in a very long time, like enough. Some weeks later, a Saturday morning, I'm at my desk, a grant proposal open on the screen, tea going cold beside the keyboard, the bay window throwing pale winter light across the floor in a long, flat stripe. The flat is quiet. Not the quiet of absence, not the quiet of waiting. The quiet of a space that has been arranged by one person over time and reflects her back accurately. I have learned to like that kind of quiet. I still have the graduation program. It's framed now, just the cover, in a narrow frame above my desk. Not because I've decided the day was good. Not because I've forgiven the empty seat or resolved anything into something cleaner than it actually is. But because page 14 has my name on it. And that was true whether anyone came or not. The record of a thing is not the same as the witness of it. I was always on that page. I just had to stop waiting for someone else to read it. I don't have the kind of father who calls on birthdays. What I have is a man who drives 2 hours and sits in my kitchen with his coat on and sometimes doesn't know what to say. That is not what I wanted at 9 years old, standing in a backyard with 12 color-coded pages and a whole life of not quite enough still ahead of me. It is what is available at 34. I have decided it is enough for now. Some days I believe that. Most days that's honest enough. I wonder sometimes if showing up late counts. Whether a decade of absence can be answered by presence now, or whether some things have a window, and the window simply closes. I don't know the answer. What I know is this: I am not waiting for it anymore. And that, more than the conversation, more than the apology, more than the tea going cold between two people learning to be in the same room again, that is the thing that finally feels like mine. If you're somewhere right now, maybe it's late, maybe you're doing something that only looks like not thinking, and you've spent a long time being good at not needing things you needed. I see you. You were never invisible. I'll be here.